Test, 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 test. Hello, hello. Yes, I'm speaking very softly now. I think it's too loud. Just going to whisper at you until you all fall asleep. And then we'll have a room full of sleeping JavaScript developers. And that will be kind of a fairy tale. Shall I speak with a normal voice? Yeah, this is better. Okay, thank you.
First do the All right, welcome everyone. So we're starting in a minute, just to try and be on time and waiting for final people, and we'll proceed with the opening and then with the following agenda. I'll just show it on the slide so everybody knows what to expect. That was dangerous. All right, so welcome everyone. So we won't be waiting for less people joining, and we'll just proceed with the opening. So we're right on time. This time we've also been happy to not have much technical issues with the live stream. And yeah, by the way, we're live streaming and recording all the talks. This is really important because if you missed previous events, you can always go to our JS Nation YouTube channel and just follow up on all the content we had recorded over the last around 5 years since we're doing this meetup. My name is Robert. I'm a tech lead at IT consultancy focused on React and Node.js called Focus Reactive, and I'm doing events. So this is one of the meetups I'm involved in. Co-organization or organization. We also do React Amsterdam with the React Amsterdam conference and JS Nation conference. More about that a bit later. And we do a bunch of other stuff, basically growing with one annual conference a year. And next one will be launching in London on React. Yeah, since this is more JavaScript meetup, this is a bit less relevant for that. We also have some co-organizers here. So Dennis running somewhere around right over there. So he's been doing the previous opening. So you see either me, either him, either Jonas on stage as well. And as I mentioned, we're live streaming. So saying hi to people watching us online. We always have some people who can make it physically and can still follow us online on YouTube or just watch recording straight day after. The recording of the meetup is basically available right after we click the stop streaming button. Hopefully you managed to get some free beer at the bar, because with the secret word Amsterdam JS, you could have get it. Probably we still have budget there, so on the breaks or between the talks, you can still come on the bar and say that you're from Amsterdam JS and you're getting free food and beers. So that's mostly possible thanks to our sponsors, as we are renting this venue. We're paying for AV setup, we're paying for beers and drinks. For drinks and food, basically out of our pocket and our fund that is funded by different companies per different event. And for today, it's Reactor, our long-running partner, so huge thanks to them. This is IT consultancy based in, the HQ is in Finland, but they're also present here in Amsterdam. Otherwise, they would probably not sponsor us. And Evolution Gaming, also our second year running partner, basically sponsoring, I think it's already 7th event or something. So this is also a global company. They have offices in a bunch of places in Europe, including Amsterdam, focused on WebGL, 3D games, and React to make it more declarative. And as I mentioned, we're doing a bunch of events. So Amsterdam JS Meetup, been a father of the JS Nation conference. The conference, which will have the 3rd edition this year already. We started in 2017. In the very first edition was in the zoo. The whole idea of how we approach conferences is to make them as fun as possible. We never would go to a boring hotel we always seek for fun places. So the first was in the zoo, the second was in a cathedral, and the third one will be also in the same cathedral. This year we actually expanded a bit, and we are moving towards more festival setup, and we'll have two venues. One will be in cathedral, and the other will be in synagogue, like just a few minutes walking from the main venue. And we're basically trying to expand the whole like program and festival to be multi-day engagement, although the main conference day is one day. We have workshops, like highly super discounted, like 30 euros per workshop, per half a day workshop. We have 4 workshops there and 2 full ones on TypeScript. Then a conference day, and then we already booked a nice place in Wendell Park. We basically will have like a stroll through the museums with the community members, with people coming to the town, or with the local community, and then we'll hang out at the park in a nice summer day, as the conference is happening in June. Yeah, the dates actually are not correct. I just noticed it because this was a screenshot from a mock website. The actual dates are, as in this slide, it's from 7th till 6th of June. But the idea is the same. Thursday is workshops day, Friday conference, but 7th instead of 11th. And the idea of the conference, the main pitch, and the whole conference offering is basically the content. And in our case, we focus on inviting core contributors and authors of multiple different libraries you're using day to day. So basically, we've been focusing all our efforts to invite those people and make sure that they will be able to visit Amsterdam and share their insights on how they contribute to their current tools, how they build the foundation for the future web. And we have Henry Zhu from Bubble, we have Webpack Core, we have CycleJS/RxJS from Andrew Stultz. We also have Michelle Westrat, our own Twitter superstar, talking on TypeScript and MobX. And we have a bunch of other people from also core Angular. We have 3D, 2D graphic engine authors. And these are only the first speakers. You can check the rest just going to justnation.com website. As you probably also noticed, we have the stickers all around the place, having our new logo. So we basically moved to this new logo with like a JavaScript symbol, like a mix of the native like JavaScript logo and the JS Nation brand. So be sure to grab some more stickers. I just spread them across the place. If you want some extra, feel free. We have a lot of them, so if you want to bring some to your colleagues to the office, just go ahead and do it. And the agenda for today is me doing the opening and finishing up as soon as possible. And then we'll have our first talk from PPK, basically bringing this up, this controversial topic of CSS and GS developers, which suddenly did a split like 3-5 years ago, where before everybody been a webmasters or like web developers, and now everybody mind their own thing. So hopefully we'll get more views on that. And the whole idea of the communities like ours is to share the knowledge and connect different communities. So hopefully this topic will be more approachable, and people who've been dismissing CSS and making jokes about it will maybe look at it from different perspective. Then we'll have a second talk, mostly focused on Node.js with some production insights, so more on that from Dpro. Then we'll have a really short break, so just be sure that you use it max for 10 minutes, so you can grab a beer from our free budget on the bar and get back here. There probably will be some food left, but I'm not sure about it. And then we'll proceed with the coding challenge. It will be a fun experiment. So basically, you'll need to have some device like a laptop, or you can pair up with somebody, and we'll have like a tool used with live coding execution environment, and then some rating. So that basically, to make it more interesting, we can even give like either a free ticket to the conference, either some major discount for the first place winner of the challenge. So it should be fun. Also for people online, you can definitely participate, as the link will be shared online, and you'll be just able to open it. And that's it from the opening side. We're online on Twitter and Facebook, everywhere. So you can either Google Amsterdam.js or JS Nation, and you'll find the conference website. You'll find the meetup page. You'll find everything you want to know about the conference and the meetups and all the future announcements that we'll have about our events. And that's pretty much it from my side. Then now we'll give some time for PPK to hook up the screen.
My mic is on, but I need to find the other adapter.
Yeah. All right, so let's give some hands for
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're online. Yeah, so I'm coming here today as a kind of a CSS evangelist, or not really an evangelist, but more about because I have put it in my head to write a book this year that will teach CSS to JavaScripters, because I think it's necessary. So before I start, show of hands, who here is primarily a JavaScripter? Not all, interesting. Of those JavaScripters, how many of you needs at least a little bit of CSS in your daily work? Almost everybody, yeah. How many of you are comfortable with CSS? Okay, I had hoped for a little less comfortable audience because I need to figure out how to teach CSS to JavaScripters. That's basically my mission today. I have prepared a fairly brief presentation that I'm going to give now, and afterwards I would hope to have some sort of discussion about why it is that there is a subset of JavaScripters that doesn't like CSS, or at least pretends it doesn't like CSS. So, but before we start, let's go briefly over a few details. It turns out to be difficult to teach CSS to JavaScripters, not because it's difficult or because JavaScripters are stupid, but because there is a disconnect somewhere. When I start to enthusiastically explain something about CSS, yeah, you know, you do this and you do that, some JavaScripters just kind of, their head closes and they don't want to listen anymore. And I don't think that's because they find it too difficult. It's something else, but I haven't really put my finger on what that something else exactly is. So I'm kind of hoping that tonight will help in that regard. I intend to find this out, and that's why I'm giving this presentation here. So, over the past few weeks, I've been thinking about teaching CSS to JavaScripters. Basically, I have a few theories in mind now, which I'm going to present to you. And I'm very much looking for feedback. So if you have something to say, don't say it right away, but I will stop talking after a while, and then you can talk to me, and I will actually take notes and take you very seriously. So with all the slides that are following, please keep in mind, does what I am saying make sense, and does it help you, or does it confuse you? Because I think it would help me, but I'm not certain anymore. It might actually confuse you, and you are actually the target audience of what I'm intending to say. Before we start, remember this. This is true for JavaScript, it's also true for CSS. Browsers are the most hostile development platforms in the world because you never know what's going to happen next. Right? And that is something that both on the CSS and on the JavaScript side is sometimes forgotten. So just so that we're all on the same page, we're having a difficult job. Now, is CSS a programming language? Question mark. Who here thinks CSS is a programming language? Who here thinks it's not a programming language? Who here is not sure? Okay. I asked on Twitter, you know, a very scientific poll. About 3,000 people replied, which is good, and the no's just barely have it. CSS is not a programming language, according to my followers on Twitter. 3,000 of them. Well, I'm not sure what this says, but it does say that this is a fairly controversial question. I mean, I got some feedback about that as well. Oh, you're asking a very controversial question. Yeah, why is it controversial? I mean, you can say it's a programming language, you can say it's not a programming language, you know, you can have a debate about that. It probably partly depends on how you define a programming language, but why would any of that be controversial? I've never really understood that, so I'm ignoring the controversial part. I'm just noting that there is a difference of opinion. CSS is declarative while JavaScript is imperative. This, to me, is right now I am seeing it as maybe a stumbling block for some JavaScripters to learn CSS. Maybe some JavaScripters have trouble wrapping their heads around a declarative language. I'm not sure. I'm just making this up on the spot, but it could be true. As an example, in CSS you just say make all links red. Well, in JavaScript, you have to be more elaborate in your instructions. This has advantages and disadvantages. The question I'm asking, is this difference enough to make learning CSS more difficult? Is there a mental hoop you have to jump through in order to understand that this is the same as this, but just differently formulated? I don't know. I don't really care at the moment if CSS is a programming language. But what I've decided to do is to pretend that it is in fact a programming language and figure out if that helps people learn CSS better. Or maybe it makes stuff more difficult. So far, the feedback I've received seems to indicate that it does make learning CSS a little bit easier for some. But if you have a different opinion, please do tell me, because I need to know. Because I want that book that I'm going to write to be actually useful to you, and not just a statement of, you know, orthodox thought on CSS, and oh, shame on you that you do not understand that. That's a bit of a problem within the CSS community. Sometimes people go, oh, you silly JavaScripters, you do not know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. It's all nonsense, ignore it. But do think about what are the differences, and are they so huge as is sometimes being thought? So let's take this extremely simple bit of CSS. This is a JavaScript variant on that, right? So first CSS, really easy. If you have a link in a menu and the mouse is over it, make it have a blue color. In JavaScript, you would have to be a bit more complicated about it. This is very bad code, by the way. You should never write any mouse over like this, but I'm keeping it simple for now. The CSS is much simpler than the JavaScript until you try to do something more complicated, like this. If you want to have an additional variable that tells you if the mouse over effect should actually take place. This is pretty hard to do in CSS. So what we're seeing here is that CSS gives you more elegance and speed. Speed both in developing and in the browser, because writing that simple half a statement we saw just now takes about half a minute, while the browser is very, very much optimized for this sort of operations. On the other hand, JavaScript gives you more control. If you want to do something that's not a simple, oh, if the mouse is over this link, make it blue, but if there is a more complicated factor involved with control structures and that sort of thing, then JavaScript is possibly the better solution. So which one is better? Oh, that is a pity. Yeah, it depends. And you're getting free advice here. I mean, you know, if you tell this to anybody, oh, it depends, you have to be very grave and solemn, and you know, as if you have spent many, many decades thinking of this, and went to a retreat, and you know, had a meaningful conversation with a lot of people. Yes, it depends. Of course, it depends. It's simple, but sometimes people have to pay a lot of money in order to take simple advice. That's basically the basics of consultancy, right? Let's talk about control statements for a little bit. This, again, a slight variation on the CSS code we saw earlier. All links in a menu have a blue color. Is this maybe an if statement? Is it maybe something like this? The CSS version of this little bit of JavaScript. Or is this maybe a for loop? A variation on this bit of JavaScript. I mean, there is something to say for both. And again, we're talking only the simplest ifs and the simplest fors here. As soon as you want to do something more than just iterate over a bunch of equal or nearly equal elements, or have a very simple if statement, if this is the case, then CSS is starting to get into trouble, while JavaScript can still easily handle it. But what we have seen now is that it is possible to say that CSS selectors are both if statements and for loops. And the big question is, does that help you in any way learn CSS better? Or does it just confuse you? Do you think, oh my God, this programming language that is not really a programming language is so weird that ifs and fors are the same? I mean, I need to figure out what's going on in your head here. So does it matter? Does it help you understand CSS better, knowing that you could see a simple CSS selector as both an if statement and a for loop? That is basically the main question I'm having so far. I mean, my research is still ongoing. I'm not totally sure where I will end up. So far what I heard is people saying, yeah, kind of makes sense what you're saying. So if you're saying the same, well, that's great on the one hand because I haven't wasted my time, but not so good on the other hand because, to be honest, I have no clue what I'm saying. I'm just making it up as I go along, and I'm just hoping that it will spark some sort of interest, some sort of lessening of mental confusion in somebody's mind. So to wrap up this very short presentation, this is something else I would like to ask, and especially after people who know a little bit more about CSS. In that book, I will eventually have to treat some CSS topics, right? I can't just be very vague and theoretical about it. I have to teach people some actual CSS. So what I thought so far of teaching in the book is the list that's going to follow, because I think these are the core concepts of CSS. And there's a lot more to CSS than what I'm going to show you just now. But I think that the stuff that I'm not showing you is relatively less important than the stuff I'm going to show you. First of all, selectors and how to keep them simple, especially the second part. The selector is simple. Oh, all paragraphs. Oh, all paragraphs in a div with a certain class name. That's easy. But keeping them simple is not, especially when you start to have problems with the cascade in CSS. Cascade is it's a different topic. I'll get back to that. Secondly, you need to know something about layout, grid, and flexbox. If I had written this book even 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been floats. But fortunately, we do not need floats anymore. Who here has ever used floats, and mean in a big way? Who here is happy that you've ever used floats in a big way? 2, okay. You have a different viewpoint than the rest of us. Nowadays, layout is about grid and flexbox. I need to teach the box model. You know, margin, padding, border. It's it's really simple once you understand it, but if you don't understand it, it can be really complicated. Besides, exactly what does padding left 20% mean, or margin left 20%? There can be some confusion about that, so I absolutely have to teach this. Cascading and variable scope. Here we delve into another serious subtopic of CSS in JS. I have hardly talked about it yet. I'm not really going to talk about it today, except to briefly note that I think that the whole discussion around CSS in JavaScript is in order to avoid the global scope of CSS variables or CSS selectors. You do not want all paragraphs in the document to have a certain style, but only the paragraphs within the specific model that you're building right now. CSS has been very bad about giving you access to local variables. And that is true. And I think it's a valid complaint of JavaScripters about CSS. But I will still have to explain to you how it actually works right now, because this is the thing you will have to use. I have to talk briefly about inheritance. You know, the way in which lower-lying elements, child elements of certain elements, inherit part of the styles of their parent, but not everything. I have to talk about media queries briefly because they're the foundation under responsive design. And I have to talk about units. And as far as I can see, oh yeah, and this is a question mark. Do I talk about positioning and viewports? I would like to, because I happen to know a lot about viewports. I can easily talk an hour about mobile viewports. And if you think, what the hell is a viewport? Come to a session, come to a future session of mine. I will explain in excruciating detail what a viewport is and why it's so bloody complicated. But is this important enough to put in this list of CSS topics? I'm not sure yet, but I could easily write it. So, my first question was the whole thing about the if statements and the for loops and CSS maybe being a programming language, but in a declarative way, not an imperative way. That whole thing, does it make sense to you and does it help you understand CSS better? My second question is there anything else that should be treated in this list? With that, we have come to the end of the presentation that I prepared. Let me see how much time we have left. We have quite a bit of time left. I like that. And I think we could start talking, have some discussion. I will put the slides online. I always do that, probably later when I have the time. So don't be afraid that you missed anything. Does anybody have something very important to say, have a great idea about what I'm talking about? I'm talking nonsense or that I'm being brilliant. I prefer the brilliance part, but you know, sometimes I talk nonsense. Yes?
So, first of all, to my mind, programming analogy...
Oh, we're going to give you a microphone. Excellent. Good idea. I'm going to make notes as well.
Cool. So the problem I find with the programming analogy is obviously, as you said, the kind of it can be a for loop or you're trying to envision it as an if loop, and that's very confusing to me.
Okay.
To me, I find it more. It's easier to think of it as I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but have you ever seen those images where it's built up of layers? So you have a pane of black, you have a pane of yellow, you have a pane of red, and it's layered, and the whole image is created through like glass with paint layers on it. Mm-hmm. You slowly build up an image. And envisioning CSS is more like that, is kind of more how it works, because then you've got the layering, you've got the, I declared all paragraphs as red, but then this paragraph is not red because of the cascading style sheet that I applied on top of it, but most of them aren't.
Okay. To you, is this about selectors in general or more specifically about the cascade? Because for the cascade, I find it a very interesting analogy. But for the selectors as a whole, I'm not sure.
Okay, so it kind of goes more into cascade, but then for me, when I'm thinking of selectors, it's more of a go through all objects on the page and then see if anything ticks this rule and then apply it. It'd be like a giant for loop across the whole DOM element.
It is, you do not see that as an entire for loop? Or you
as
do?
One giant for loop, but like with all rules included, not like for each rule go through and check the entire DOM, because that almost sounds like you're doing a lot of work when you're not really.
Okay.
And then the only other thing
it is a lot of work. Yeah, that is true.
The only other
but I really like this thing about layered images as an analogy for the cascades. I simply did not think about that yet.
The only other one that I wanted to say is at the end you mentioned selectors and stuff, and I wondered where you were going to put in selector priority. So how you increase the importance of so that's a common pitfall that a lot of people come into. Why is this div not being thing? It's got a class name. Oh, but actually, div child parent is more specific. I forget the term that they use.
Specificity.
Yeah.
Say it 3 times very fast. You'll never forget it again.
So I don't know if that was included already in your selector topic, but
sort
that's
of.
That
Yes,
be covered,
the cascade mostly. But yes, I will definitely have to talk about that. Because it's, and that's why I said that especially creating simple selectors is so important, because the fact that we have these complicated specificity rules means that if you create a really, really complex selector, you can expect side effects that you don't really want to. But yes, I am definitely going to go into specificity.
Peter, two quick questions from YouTube.
Yeah.
First one is CSS Turing complete?
I don't know.
Okay. And the second one, is there a JavaScript library that generates CSS from JavaScript?
Again?
Is there any library which generates CSS from JavaScript?
Is that a question?
Yeah. Is there?
It happens, yes.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's a follow-up to the previous question. So I think how the browsers are treating CSS is they go from the back, right, from the right, and
in selectors, yes.
in selectors, yeah, exactly. It goes from the right. So in that sense, it's if you think of it as a for loop, then the object that you have in the for should have the property parent, and you can put any conditions against it or something. So it's a imperative declarative language, but still the browsers do the imperative, treat it the imperative way. See, so you just have to check how the browsers are interpreting CSS, and then you have the answer for your question.
Yes, but that is more theoretically you are completely right, but it's more difficult than you would think because because a style sheet can grow so immensely huge. I mean, I've got a not very huge style sheet, and I'm already getting confused. This is a different topic, but it's still something that I need to address in some way. I want to make a note of your comment. Does this count as imperative?
Because the browsers are imperative.
They do it in a certain order, that is true, but I've always seen an entire style sheet as something that's applied at once, and that is how it ought to work. I mean, the order of the declaration matters only for specificity and cascading, you know. If you something that's gone later overrides that something that was defined first. But other than that, it should all be applied simultaneously. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean here. Could you
elaborate?
Could you finish my sentence here? Does this count as imperative because?
Because the browser is written in the imperative language.
Okay. I'm tempted to say no right now, but if anyone has another opinion, I would love to hear about this.
Yeah, I think treating it like how these selectors work and explaining them in an imperative way is a bit contradictive, or it might confuse people. I think I would be confused as a beginning developer. But maybe if there's an imperative construct, it would be like a match clause in some languages. And that would be more true.
And explaining them as?
A match clause.
Match?
Yeah, like a match statement in, I don't know, Rust has them. And
okay, I'll look into it.
And I'm thinking, like, as a JavaScript developer just starting, like maybe making a web application, some design patterns, like some general stuff. That's like, how do you set up, or do you use like two-central layout? Do you use a flexbox, or do you use like margin auto?
Yes,
stuff like that.
I am not totally sure that my book should go that route because it is a different topic than just explaining the basics of CSS. Basically, what I hope to achieve is that somebody reads my book and says, "Oh, now I understand, you know, how CSS as a whole works, and now I need to figure out a lot of details, including design patterns." So I don't think I will treat design patterns. Maybe here and there a little bit, but not in a serious way, because I think it would make the book too huge. I mean, I do not intend to explain all of CSS, just the most important parts. Maybe kind of CSS the good parts. I'm not sure yet. Would be an interesting name. Briefly write that down.
Okay, maybe my suggestion wouldn't be very constructive, but I would just want to share my wish that your book will be issued in form of comic book.
Ooh,
Because I think
comic
it's a-
book.
it's a perfect,
Wonderful. Are you an artist?
I'm not, but I know artists who might be interested in this enterprise. I really believe that the Point and Guide to Ruby opened like a great experiment. That it was a great initiative to write a book in form of graphic novel about such static topic. And CSS as a language about the visual stuff.
Okay, I
It's
see
a
what you mean.
perfect fit
I see
for
what
them.
you mean. We're going to make a note. I don't think it will actually happen, but I am going to make a note. I mean, I was at one point considering working with an illustrator, not as to make it a comic book, but because sometimes illustrations are so very important, you know, just to show people, okay, the margin goes to here and then the padding takes over, that sort of stuff. So maybe. Anything else? Yeah.
So regarding topics that you may or may not decide to include, thinking personally for me was a big eye-opening thing when I started working with level 3 selectors, like the new or not so new anymore level 3 selectors, like things to play with attributes and value from attributes. I think that's a huge important deal in the modern web app universe.
I think I am going to at least give a table of all the possible CSS selectors. Yes, I think I would. Because it's interesting, you could see those selectors as, I mean, I've written something on my site about this. By the way, if you do want to follow me thinking about this and maybe jump into entirely the wrong conclusions, I'm trying to write a blog post every week, a short blog post about this topic. And I wanted to show you something in the if statements and for loops. Oh, by the way, this is clearly an if statement. At MediaNet support rules are clearly if statement. There's no doubt about this. This. So this is, let's call it a for loop for now, just for the sake of argument. These are exceptions. So it's as if you put an if in the for loop and say, oh, if it's the first child, do something else, and oh, if it has ID current, do something else again. So it is possible to make CSS for loops slightly more complicated than what I showed in my presentation, but it may be weird, because you would intuitively expect the stuff that modifies a for loop to be inside the for loop, and in CSS it's not. It's just under the for loop that it changes. So this, and in this way, especially the not selector is really interesting. I had some great conversations with a few people about this book, and what I also found was, suppose you use both the not and the first child on the same element, so something like a not current colon first child. I found that some JavaScripters think that you first take all the elements with ID current and then take the first child of that element, which is not actually true. You know, it's all elements that are both a first child and do not have an ID equals current. But that is the sort of thing that I really, really need to know about teaching CSS. Sometimes people just misunderstand one slight tiny bit of, especially the selectors, which may cause them to completely misunderstand CSS. So these are really interesting things for me. So attribute selectors and such, yes, I am definitely going to treat those. Anything else?
Yes, I think. On the question of CSS programming language, I just Googled, of course, and I found it is Turing complete with the help of user input.
Interesting.
In my mind, that does not count, so I think CSS is not a programming language. Also, for me, explaining the selectors if statements or loops doesn't really help it. In my mind, it makes it a little more complicated. For me, it looks more like filters like SQL or link in C#.
Selectors look more like...
yeah, but that could be different for other people. The main problem I have with CSS is that I cannot debug it. If I want to do something, last week I was centering a box I was using a max width and a margin auto and stuff like that, and it didn't work. And I don't know how to find why it didn't work, let alone what I need to do to make it work.
Yeah.
So I just trial and error. If your book helps me do that, I'll buy
box
it.
model stuff, yes, definitely. But you are very right that this is one of the biggest differences between JavaScript and CSS. You know, it's if you make only one tiny little mistake in JavaScript, a misplaced comma, etc., the whole program crashes, and you know that's something wrong. In CSS, it just silently glosses over any problems that it finds. To be honest, I do not know how to explain that better than I did just now, just in a few more paragraphs. I mean, this is just something that is the case and that you will have to learn when you work with CSS. So if anybody has any bright ideas on that, I'd love to hear it.
And yeah, now the last person, and then if you have other questions or suggestions, you can do it after the talk.
Okay.
I would like to elaborate on your story. It's all great and beautiful and dandy when you just start with a blank CSS sheet. But what do you do with the legacy? Like when you just get some WordPress block with like 20 libraries in it. How do you approach it?
How do you approach it? Good question. With trepidation, very carefully. You know, try to find somebody who actually knows something about the code base. You probably will not, because otherwise it wouldn't be such a huge problem. I do not have an easy answer for you, except what I occasionally do is just start turning off parts of CSS. You know, I take this block has something to do with a class equals special one, whatever that may be. Let's take it my class, something like that. I mean, I once found one of my bit of my own CSS where the most important selector was class special 3. Then you know you've done something wrong. And in the case, take that bit of special 1, just remove it, see what happens. And with a bit of luck, you can just at least weed some of the dead wood out there and find yourself with a slightly reduced code base. But this is probably the most difficult part of CSS development, and I do not pretend that I can give you a simple answer to that. It's just really, really difficult. With that, I think we're out of time. Yes. Thank you so much. You've really helped me, and we will see what happens.
Thanks a lot, PPK. I really like the format of like collaborative discussion, as hopefully some of these points will get into the book.
I hope, I think so.
Maybe you'll even share or like mention some of people here. It would be really fun to have that. All right, so yeah, we'll need to get your mic, and we'll need to have Dipro here to start hooking up his screen.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Okay. It's visible.
All right, and the second talk for the evening is from Dipro, talking on NodeJS Promise and production, and some insights from pretty high load environment that he's working with. So let's give some hands to Dipro.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, this is the first time I'm doing a meetup talk, so please expect a lot of goof-ups. And if they don't happen, well, I was lucky. By the way, this is the first time I saw so many people in one room who were so enthusiastic about CSS. I've never seen this happen before. So who I am, I'm Dipro. I work for The Zone. I'm a backend engineer. Some of my colleagues are here as well. Yeah. So what we do is we stream live sports across a few countries across the globe. And what that means is that we handle a lot of critical services in production at very, very high scale. And yet, some people in the company decided to use Node.js as the application language. And I've been writing Node.js in production for a few years now. I wrote an accountancy software before this job in production. And every time I say this to people who are not familiar with Node.js or who are not very fond of it, often they come up and say, oh wow, how could you write something so critical in Node.js in production? And yeah, I asked myself the same question. I've been on this path of discovery for some time, and I've been trying to read a lot of stuff and actually question myself, because the reason why I came to write Node.js was not because it's the best framework around, or because of those reasons. I wrote Node.js because I like JavaScript. It's a very powerful tool, very powerful language, easy to learn, very easy to onboard yourself with, and you can do a lot of cool stuff very quickly with it. And there are a lot of frameworks and a lot of libraries around that you can use. The community is vibrant. JavaScript is sexy. That's what I think. That's why I started writing Node.js, and it gave me the platform to write backend services, which also excited me because I could do a lot of stuff. I could read files. I could store data in a database. I could work with SQL. I could work with file storage. I could actually write API servers. Some things that I could only do in the past, writing Java, because when I studied computer science engineering, I was only learning Java as a backend language. And I didn't really like Java. I'm really sorry, this is no offense to anyone, but I didn't really like Java. And fast forward, when I started writing Node.js, for me it was like, wow, this is amazing. So that's why I still do it. And then what I learned along the path was that I wanted to write better code that would actually give me a lot of confidence when I ship these services to production. I would actually know what is going on, right? And that's the intent of my talk, that I'm not just here to just give a meetup talk. Of course, that's fancy. But what my real takeaway, what my real intent is to share with you what I've learned, what I feel, also some of my personal preferences, how to handle errors better, how to have better monitoring, how to have better predictability. Like, I've always learned in computer science how to write deterministic algorithms, and now all of a sudden I'm introduced into non-deterministic algorithms, where I actually don't know how long it will take. And that's the majority of my work. Most of the work that I do is non-deterministic because it's asynchronous, right? And I've learned multi-threading in other languages, and then I come into JavaScript, and then it's single-threaded, and I don't know how to handle concurrency because JavaScript is apparently a single-threaded language. So how do you handle lots of stuff at the same time? So we are going to discuss that as well. And we are going to look at the various phases of the event loop. Oops, I do need to give my laptop a bit of attention now and then. By the way, I didn't do a PPT slide because I'm a software engineer. I don't know how to do PPTs. So I just did a markdown file on my repository, and I will share this after the talk. So what is Node.js? As you can see, like, we had the discussion previously with CSS, whether it's a programming language or not. Node.js is clearly, it's a JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. And if you want to learn how V8 as an engine interprets and compiles JavaScript better, there is a fantastic talk on this by Francesca Hinkelmann from Google, who is a V8 engineer. And I have also mentioned her blog in my references. And I've also shared the videos that I would like you to also go through, because she does explain in detail how to do performance profiling with V8, how to use the API, how you can probe your functions better. I think those two are great videos. And of course, there is another video that I shared, how event loop works in JavaScript, not just in Node.js, but in JavaScript in general. I think that's one of the most viewed videos on this topic. And of course, coming back to the topic itself, as an asynchronous event-driven JavaScript runtime, Node is built to help us design scalable network applications. To give an insight, what I'm doing right now with some of my colleagues over there, we are building a data ingestion service that is taking lots of files, parsing them, taking lots of data, and then streaming them into a data storage. And we are doing all this in Node.js, right? And at very, very high scale, because our service scale is around 1 million users, 1 million requests per second. So how are we able to do this using Node.js? Coming back to why Node was built to help us do this, at the heart of the design of Node.js is the fact that we, as developers, we prefer to write structured code. We prefer to write code that does what we want it to do. If we introduce the activity of delegating stuff to threads and workers, and we have it in our service, then we are doing two things. We are writing our functions, as well as we are writing the act of managing threads. And I, as a developer, at least I do not want to do that. I want to delegate that activity to something else. And that something else in Node.js is libuv. Libuv is a library written in C++ that helps Node.js manage its workers under the hood. And it's a black box. And I'm very happy that it's a black box because I don't have to worry about it, right? And the complexity of multiple simultaneous operations where possible I/O efficiency, blah, 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 that is completely delegated outside. So when I, as a developer trying to write functions, all I need to do is manage callbacks, right? What is a callback? Callback is something that, hey, let's say my friend X, I call X and I say, hey, you know what? I want you to do this for me. When you're done, call me back. After Y amount of time, X is going to come and give me a callback. And I wait. That is what a callback is. And that is at the heart of the event loop in Node.js. So I copied, of course, I shared the link of the official Node.js documentation where you can go through how event loop works. And it's a very nice documentation of all the phases. And I copied the different phases, and I'm going to talk about one of the phases, that is the poll phase. So every time we write an asynchronous function, the JavaScript engine will go through all the functions that we have written. And I can, at this point, I think it's a good idea to show some of my code that I wrote. I will, of course, explain it later what this is doing. I'm sorry? Zoom? Oh, yeah, of course. So at this point, when the Node.js runtime sees this line, this goes into the queue, and then the actual callback of this function is passed into libuv, and then Node passes on to the next line. And it keeps parsing the code, right? So it's not waiting until it gets that, until it gets the result of that function. So there is no blocking in the I/O. And this is the heart of design of Node.js, that every time it sees any kind of asynchronous function, it doesn't wait until the function has executed. It passes the executor as a callback to the V8, to libuv, and libuv will pass the callback later on when it's done, and then the callback will be synchronously executed by the event loop when the event loop can process it. So what I've done in this code is, in this very simple code base, is that I'm using a API, and thanks to them, I'm going to mention it right away before I get sued for mentioning their API. This is a free API that I'm using for getting a random beer for myself. It's called api.punkapi.com. So as you can see, I'm also carrying this beer on stage. I really like beers. So I wanted to do something with this in my code. So what I did was I wrote a function that would call this API and get a random beer for myself. And of course, blah, blah, blah. And then I get this. And if for some reason this object doesn't have what I need from it, I hardcode my favorite beer, Ivit, which I think is the best white beer of Amsterdam. And then, yeah, if something goes wrong, of course, I say beers were not found, and I log the reason. So this is what I'm doing. And then I have some benchmark functions, and then I have a file here in my code base, which basically has an integer. And it gets that, so it reads the file, it gets that number, and I store it. And then what I do is that number is a double-digit number, so I try to sum the digits. And then after I have done that, I write this line into another file. So I write that sum as the price of this beer, and the name of the beer, and the tagline of the beer. Right? And I'm going to run this function now. And I don't expect it to work because I'm not connected to the internet, so this shouldn't work. Yes. So if you see, this is too much. I need to run it again. Yeah. So of course it says that beers were not found because this address is not there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my Wi-Fi, which is connected to my hotspot, so I can connect to this anytime. And I hope it connects, because otherwise this is pointless. It doesn't. I'm sorry. It's going to be on in no time. Yep, I'm connected now. And that's it, right? It ran. So what happened here is, of course, I called the API. I got my beer. I got my number. I got the price. And then I wrote to a file. And this is my output file, beers and numbers. And this is what it wrote. So it is giving me a Riptide, which is a twisted, merciless stout for just €7. Long live that. And what I also did was, at the very end, I have a promise.all, because of course I'm doing two asynchronous things. And if you look at the first half of my main function, I have one line that is awaiting get random beer and another line that is awaiting get numbers, which to me is a bit weird. So I do a promise.all so that I can do it at the same time. And I will come to the reasons why I did that later. I'll also go through what I did with the echo time elapsed, which is a function that is trying to give me a benchmark. So what I do is, in this function, I pass the timestamp of the start time when the main function started executing. And I also pass in the name of the function that I'm trying to benchmark. And I'm logging the function name, and I'm trying to make the difference. And I'm trying to show you how much time it took to execute that function. So if we go back to our terminal, so when we started, of course, time elapsed 1 millisecond. Then the getBeers function executed. Time elapsed was 675 milliseconds. Get numbers, which was reading from a file, took 3 more milliseconds. Get sum, which is a synchronous function, took 1 more millisecond. And then write sum, which is taking all this information and writing to a file, it takes 679. So it's at the same millisecond that I'm getting the sum and writing to the file. So how is it possible that we take 675 milliseconds to talk to an API, and then just 3 milliseconds to read from a file, and 0 milliseconds to write to a file? Of course, that's not the case, right? So what Node has done is, it has passed a handler for every awaited function that you see. So every asynchronous function that is being awaited is giving a handler back to the variable. And that handler has a pointer to a promise, right? And what is a promise? If I go back to my talk material, a promise is basically, in real life, if I tell my friend that, hey, I promise you, I will review your PR in time. And then I don't do it, right? Because, well, I don't keep my promises in real life, and I said that in my bio as well. But if I do keep that promise, if I do review that PR in time, and I go back and say, okay, hey, you know what? Right now I'm busy. I will come back to you later. And then I go and review the PR. I leave a comment. I approve it, and my friend gets that feedback later on at some point. For some reason, if I don't approve it, I leave a comment and I reject that PR. He gets a reason why I've rejected it. It's the same thing what happens in a promise, because at one point, a promise is pending, and then at one point it is settled. And if a promise is settled, it could be for 2 reasons. It's either fulfilled with a value that is being passed by the resolve function, or it is rejected with a reason that is being passed by the reject function. And this is an improvement on the earlier Node callbacks that we used to do, because it resulted in callback hell. And it was a pyramidal code that nobody wants to read, nobody wants to maintain. And as some of us have already seen it, if you get a legacy Node.js code with callbacks, it's just very, very hard to maintain it. And I will show an example of that, because sometimes we do need callbacks. It's just very difficult to avoid it. So in my function where I'm trying to call the API for beers, I use the native HTTPS module. And in this case, I have to use a callback because there is no other option, right? So I have a callback with the response, and I'm listening on the data event of res. And then I'm trying to read from the buffer, and I'm trying to push into an array all the lines I'm reading from that. And then when it ends, I resolve with that response. And if it errors, which it did earlier when I had no internet connection, it rejected with that error. And that error was the API was not found. If I had followed the same criteria, if I had followed the same style in all this code here, this would not be straight line code. This would be very hard to read. And the moment you keep scaling your code and the moment you keep having new developers who probably are new to Node or who are not new to Node, it would be so hard for us to read. But the moment we have this awaited, you can actually wrap it in a try-catch block, which is great because you can handle your errors. It's easily readable. And it's just, yeah, you can log. You can pass your logs at every point. You can pass a log after awaiting the function, which means that you have a success log. And you can have an error log in your catch, which means that you can actually have super high monitoring. Because when you have an incident in production, it's very important for us to go and check where exactly that error came from. And this gives us that. Whether you work with Azure or you work with AWS, we have all the tools that we need to give us all the insights in production. All we need to do is have a try and catch. And people who have come into Node.js from other languages, they are familiar with the try and catch syntax. And because of this new introductions to JavaScript, it's just super easy to do that. But of course, going back to the earlier code that I showed was the promise constructor. Coming back to the analogy that I shared here, is that at some point the promise will resolve the value. But what happens if I just do promise.resolve 5? Does it return a promise, or does it return the 5? Or is it synchronous, or is it asynchronous? If I ever do promise.resolve 5, it will resolve synchronously with that value, 5. Why do I do promise.all in my main function? So let's say that we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 different sources of data into our function. And in our function, we also have 5 or 6 different destinations of our source, right? And my function is trying to transform the data and just pass it on. And it has several such lines. It could be a for loop. It could be a map method where you're just doing something asynchronous on every data in an array. What do you do? What we do is we just get the promise from that asynchronous function, and we pass it into an array, and we do a promise.all on that. And the caveat to promise.all is every promise that you're passing in that array has to be error handled. Because if you don't, then the promise.all will reject with the first rejection. So it will not continue executing the rest of the promises because it has already rejected with something. In this example, both my getRandomBeer and getNumbers is handled with errors. So if I now go to my file.io function and show what I'm doing with the getNumbers, what I do is I create a read stream from my file path, and I'm listening on the readable stream. By the way, a stream is in computer science is a sequence of ordered binary data. So if you're handling large volumes of data, it makes sense to use streams, because it doesn't make sense to store all of that in memory, because that's just not good good computing. So what we do is we listen on the data event, which is basically trying to handle chunks of that stream and doing something with it. And of course, if you're using streams, you need a buffer because you have to store it temporarily in a small piece of memory. And that's what it's doing. It's trying to convert that from that buffer to a string. And then it's trying to convert that number into digits. And then when it's done, when the end event is emitted on that stream, we resolve it with the integers array, and that's it. And if there is an error, we of course reject it. It's the same style that I had in the API call as well. And of course, in the write stream function, there's not much to do. It's just I write it, and that's about it. And because both my promises are handled, so it could be that in either of these functions, I have an unhandled rejection. then in my main function, the promise.all will reject, and I would probably miss out on something. And what that means in production is we have no idea what the state of our application is. So it could be that our application errored out at line 47, or I don't know, line 49 at any point, and I don't know what was the last written data, what was the last executed part of my code. And that's where my nervousness comes in when I'm writing code for production, because I need to know what I have done successfully. I need to know what I've failed at. This is basically getting feedback. It's just something that we also need in our personal life. This is what it allows us to give. Going back to the benchmarks, if we try to see how much time it took for us to do sequential execution of the asynchronous statements, it took us 679 milliseconds. And how much time it took for us to do it in promise.all, it took us a bit less than 600 milliseconds, right? So it shows that promise.all gives us better optimization in terms of time complexity. Okay, I'll go back to my talk content because I think I have covered promises. Going back to the event loop, if you see the poll phase, what it does, I did cover it in the past, but what the poll phase does is every time it gets an input-output event, it will try to delegate it to libuv, and then once my callback has been executed, I get it back. And then this will maintain the order of execution in my queue. So the poll phase will not be starved, of course, because there is a maximum limit on the poll phase, which means that if it crosses a certain amount of time, the poll phase will be stopped and it will move on to the next phase. And if there are timers, which I haven't covered in this code, if let's say we have a set timeout or a set immediate, that would mean that set immediate would mean that the poll phase will move on to the check phase that will execute the callback passed by set immediate. And if there's a set timeout, that would mean that once the poll phase has successfully executed its functions, it would go to the timer phase, and then the callbacks from the timer phase will be executed. I'm not covering the other phases because I don't know them myself very well, and I haven't needed to. Production insights, yeah. So as I covered already, like what I prefer to do is I want to handle my errors well, because it just gives us better confidence, better feedback. We know exactly what we're doing. If there is 5xx, we know where to look at, and it just helps us. It just helps us at 4 a.m. when we get an incident. Predictability, of course. Some of our algorithms that we wrote will always be non-deterministic, but it will still give us some predictability. We can write benchmark tests. We can write some stress tests, and that will give us, what I haven't covered is, there is this function called getActiveHandles, and there is another function called getActiveRequests from the process. So Node has a library called process that is native, and if you call the process object and you call its getActiveHandles method, you know exactly how many handles in the event loop you have at that point. And getActiveRequests will also include the timers that you have set. And if you want to profile your function's memory state, then you can use the V8 object, and you can get the heap space and get the memory state at that time. Scalability and readability, that goes hand in hand, because if you're trying to add more features, you're trying to add more load, of course, promise.all helps a lot. And at the same time, try and catch helps us to have better error handling. It's straight line code, so it's very easy to read. You add new developers, it's very easy to maintain. You can delegate scope of actions to different files and functions. Monitoring, of course, I added a lot of console logs, which is not something we do in production, but yeah, I don't have my logger library here. I have used Winston in the past, and in our company, we have our internal logger module that is connected with AWS CloudWatch. And of course, you can add several such tools in your code for that. References, this is key. So, of course, I was not at this place 2 years or 3 years ago. I didn't know what I was doing, and I needed to read a lot of material. Node.js documentation or MDN documentation is not enough. What I had to read was something that I was also shown by one of my colleagues, the Mastering Node.js book that I can read on orally. Franziska Hinkelmann. Her Medium blog is there. She's one of the key figures in Node.js. I think reading her blogs and watching her videos is one of the best things we can do. And of course, the Clean Code Handbook, that is something that I always recommend to any of my peers, because I feel all of us should read this book. It's super important for us. The cool videos I already shared. I have already acknowledged API, Punk API. Of course, thanks to Amsterdam.js for giving me a chance to share my insights with you guys. Thanks for this amazing event. I did come to Amsterdam.js conference last year, and my inspiration for this talk comes from there, because I attended last conference, which was, the keynote was from Douglas Crockford, and he gave a talk on parallelism, and which is one of the aspects of concurrency, and that is why I wanted to give a talk on how I do it in my. And there was also another talk from Andre Stals on streams, and he's an expert in RX, but he had his own library that would actually show duplex streams talking to each other. That was very cool. So I wanted to be a part of this community, and for me it was a great way, because my company also gave me a chance to come here and share our insights. And of course, Maurizio and everyone at DAZN who did help me in this, in preparing this talk and making it better, all my colleagues who did a dry run with me. And the next challenge, because of course you guys have been very patient listeners, I wanted to also share this link with you. So a lot of people who have been discussing what promise.then or .catch can do, or what async await can do, there is a very important announcement from V8 back then, how performance improvements were done by using async await. And I think this is something that I also, I'm sorry, zooming? So of course, when we are writing code, memory consumption and time complexity are like super important features for us to consider. And I feel that if we go through this blog and we write some benchmarks for every function that we write, it will give us a very key comparison metric to decide whether we should write using promises or to write using async await. I think this blog is really good for us. With that, I come to the end of my talk. I think I shouldn't disconnect it yet. So if you have any questions or feedback, please let me know. I will upload this code base to GitHub, and I will share it with the community after this talk. And if you have any questions, I will try to solve it. Of course, raise a PR. That's about it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dipro. It's really nice to hear that you got inspired from our previous conference. Like that's why we're doing this stuff, actually. That's why we're hosting meetups, so people like newcomers can actually come here and share, and then get some interesting discussions. And talking about discussions, so we're having a 10-minute break, so you can reach our speakers to continue discussions you couldn't raise when they've been on the stage. In 20 minutes past 8, please be sure to come here, because we'll continue with the coding challenge. You'll need to use your laptop. If you don't have laptop, please pair up with somebody so we can work together. And please connect to Wi-Fi. There's a public Wi-Fi which is free. Just click on it and you have it.
Hello? Yeah. Guys. Hello? Thank you. Guys, could you do me a favor? Would you mind moving a bit closer just to keep this, to keep it warm? And please, if you don't mind, open your laptops. If you brought your laptop, connect to the Wi-Fi, all these sort of things, yeah? If you don't have the laptop, try to pair with someone to make sure that this session is still productive, yeah? Cool. So please, guys, start at the bottom. If you don't mind coming a bit closer, it needs to be a bit more intimate, yeah? Experience. So I guess now you are connecting to the Wi-Fi and all these sort of things. I'll give you the instructions to join the challenge in a minute, so don't worry about that. Actually, I can leave the instructions now, and then we'll start the challenge in literally 3 minutes. Right, so I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ricardo. I'm a JavaScript developer based in London, and I'm the founder of Codery. So Codery was that. This is an online, free-to-play gaming platform to, first of all, help you, help myself, and help everybody improving our JavaScript and React skills. Yeah. So today I would like to do an unusual activity with you, which is coding. Yeah, this is a coding meetup, right? So for the next 30 minutes, I would like to invite you to join the platform and to participate in one of the challenges. What a challenge is? Let me do a very, very quick 30 seconds walkthrough on the platform. So talking about JavaScript, we will see 3 different levels of difficulty: beginners, intermediate, and expert. So essentially, for each level of difficulty, you'll get a bunch of questions. Yeah. So similar to Code Wars, if you know Code Wars already, the main difference is, first of all, we focus on UX, then we support React, and finally, we take lots of metrics to evaluate your performance. And this is what we'll be showing at the end of the session, right? So you will see a question about anything about JavaScript, and then TDD, right? We'll have to figure out how to solve the problem. So essentially, after the challenge, we'll show something like that. Yeah. So we will compare your performance according to different metrics that we'll evaluate that afterwards. Yeah. So don't worry about that much. And yeah, and finally, we'll talk a bit about the ranks, right? The social aspect of the coding platform. And here you can see how strong you are with JavaScript and how much you've progressed over time. As I said, this is a completely free-to-use platform, so feel free to join it, and I hope we have some fun today. As I mentioned before, so the steps to join the challenge and to test, to prove, and to compare your skills against the other players, codery.com/play, and then you will have access to a list of challenges, something like, I'll show you in a second, something like that. You will see 3 blue challenges because they are on, yeah, expert, intermediate, or beginner. Up to you, right? FYI, you got 28 minutes starting from now, right? Feel free to pick your, your skill set, and then, yeah, at the end of this 28 minutes, we'll review the results. Ideally, we like to call to the stage the winner of each challenge. Let's have some fun today, yeah. So yeah, I hope everybody knows how to proceed. Also, again, just in case, the instructions. So please join with Google Chrome. This is still an experimental platform, has been tested by about 400 developers, mainly, but not only in London. And of course, one of the reasons why we're here is because your feedback as experienced JavaScript developers is very valuable for us, yeah? So any feedback, any idea about how to improve it is highly welcome, yeah? So I'll leave the instructions here for a couple of minutes. And apart from that, if anyone has any question about how to use the platform, how to progress with the questions, just let me know. Yeah, we explained that. Please use Chrome, still experimental. Or Safari should work as well, but ideally Chrome. Thank you. I'm going to disconnect the screen. Is that okay if I disconnect the screen for a few minutes? Hope it is, right? I don't want to spoil any results. You can Google whatever you want, of course, but you will see that if you go to the internet, if you go to Google, if you go to Stack Overflow, you get a penalty on your score. Focus penalty, yeah? But that's still okay, right? Up to you, you need to decide. Speed, elegance, tenacity, accuracy. Several metrics are going to be analyzed today. Yes, the platform is based on Node 10, so that means that you can use the majority of the features of modern JavaScript, yes. You can use arrow functions, you can use await async, even though probably you won't need it, promises, template literals, any method on the array prototype, yeah, should be fine.
You said Node V10.
Correct. Don't underestimate the elegance console, guys. At the bottom, on the right-hand side, we are linting your solution, right? So if you ignore semicolons, wrong indentation, very long methods, very long lines, you'll get a big penalty. So be careful, guys, with these sort of things. Say it again? Yeah, oh, you want some music? Not from Spotify, not from Spotify. Yes, that's fine. Remember, guys, there is a big, because I can see already that some of you are struggling with the same question. So there is a button to skip the question, right? So don't waste your time with the same question if you find it particularly complicated. Sorry, say it again?
So can you assume that the input is going to be valid input, or do you have to check if it's...
The input is supposed to be a valid input. Yes, correct. So all your responsibility is your responsibility to complete the exercise, yeah? Cheers.
Als je in de gelegenheid bent, neem dan even een glaasje. Ik wacht wel even hoor. Zo, dan wens ik je nog een fijne dag. We zouden met z'n allen meer water moeten drinken. Wil je ook vaker water drinken? Kijk voor de voordelen en tips op samengezond.nl of download de app.
15 minutes left, guys. No pressure.
How do you make the server escape if you put it into an infinite loop?
It should time out.
So I kind of forgot the plus plus somewhere.
10 minutes.
Is if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're doing it wrong. What is freedom? I think I stole this from Bob Dylan, but maybe I stole this from Woody Guthrie. Freedom for me is waking up in the morning and going to sleep at night, and in between doing exactly what I want to do. What's the secret to happiness? The secret to happiness is finding something you love and then doing that for the rest of your life.
Badem International Medical Center Amsterdam is een kliniek met een uniek concept, waar multidisciplinaire zorg met bijna alle medische specialismen onder één dak wordt aangeboden.
Gotta see things, see new faces and brand new things. Gotta go places and do things, maybe to forget.
Minutes, guys, come on. Almost there.
one too.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. How was it? Cool. Awesome. So we'll present the results in 1 minute, literally 1 minute. Why 1 minute? Because the system takes few seconds, asynchronous, right? Like we learned previously. Because we got 1 minute, what do we do on the next 60 seconds? I'd like to do something fun. You know the Eurovision Song Contest, right? Well, all the countries go there and they sing and so they vote, you know. So, because we'll be doing several coding challenges in Europe this month, I would like to present you some characters, some dancing characters, and then feel free to vote for your favorite one. Very quickly, first of all, the Spanish one. Let's see if there's any song. There's no music, I believe.
So, this is just Mark. So you go here, you switch to this, and you press this, and then this nice stuff.
Awesome, brilliant, thank you. Right, so the Spanish character. It's Bora Bora. Sorry. Well, this is one of them, right? Then the Italian. That's my favorite one. Plasterman, right? Famous worldwide. Self-descriptive. Oh, you're a local hero, guys. Here we go. He lost the battle, by the way, if anyone's interested. And finally, the British. Of course. Yeah. Feel free. You cannot vote for the Dutch one. It's like Eurovision. You need to vote for either the Spanish, the Italian, or the British. To vote, yes, drop a message here in the messaging tool, and at the end of the month, we'll show the results. So, what we got today? I'm going to ignore beginner because we just got one player joining beginner, and he just solve one question and skip everything else. So this is intermediate. What we got today here? It's hard to see who is the winner, right? So what are we measuring here? FYI, tenacity, how many questions out of 5 you completed? Accuracy, how many times you press the green or the blue button and you fail? Yeah. So for instance, the red one, he played Street Fighter mode. You know Street Fighter when you just hit random buttons with Chun-Li or Ryu? Yeah. Speed, how long it took you to complete the challenge. Focus, how many times you went to Google, right? You remember the discussion before. And finally, elegance, semicolons, indentation, yeah, all these sort of things. We are linking your results. So, let's see the results. Coding Challenge, Amsterdam JS, 14th of March. I'm going to invite the winner to stage to share some words. Starting from the bottom. Dusan, no points today, right? Hopefully next time we'll get better. Of course, it cannot get worse, right? That's the positive. Yeah. We got people from. I saw some people joining from remotely, right? Which is a good thing. Ramiro, 9 points for him today, right? One question solved, right? It's a bit hard to see, but anyway, one question solved for him. Good stuff. Top 6, Ilias. 29, 2 questions out of 5 sorted, right? Look at the elegance. He or she didn't care, right? Playing hard. Top 5, Abdel Yaslil. 52, 4 questions, right? Looking good, you see, looking pretty good. The accuracy wasn't great, but anyway, good result for him today. Top 4, Torben. Oh, look at the elegance, right? It's interesting. Is it because the elegance is probably the easiest thing to solve, right? You get the elegance console. It's telling you, please add a semicolon. Please add an indentation. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, whatever. I know this is something we can argue if in 2019 semicolons, should be a reason to get a penalty or not. But I'm sure there is something else apart from semicolons here. Yeah. Right. Top 3 podium. Robert, 79, 5 out of 5. You see, really, really good result for him. Again, elegance was the main issue. Top 2, 80, Konstantin. Oh, nice, well done. Actually, he finished like in 10 minutes. It was super good. Again, elegance was the main issue. Apart from that, really, really good. And that means the winner, and I would like to call him or her, clearly him, the winner of the day on intermediate challenge is Mr. Sergey. Well done, Sergey. How was it? How you found it?
Well, it was quite fun.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It took you, what, 5 minutes to complete it, right?
I believe that a little bit more.
Okay, cool. You enjoyed?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so...
Yeah, it's a pity that I didn't finish the last one. Oh, I mean, the expert one.
Say it again? Microphone close to... Oh, yeah.
To me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this was fun.
Okay, cool. So that was great, mate. I hope next time you can enjoy the expert, yeah, because you clearly nailed it. Thank you very much, mate. Well done. And now, finally, we're out of time. So very quickly, experts, the king of the kings. That's very interesting as well, right? Actually, it looks like one person. I cannot see that clearly. No, one person solved 4 questions. So nobody completed the challenge. Actually, as I said, when we run this kind of exercises in London with 100 people, we give them 60 minutes. Yeah. Let's see the results. Ooh, that's my email. Thank you. Cool. Here you go. Coding challenge, Amsterdam, experts. Starting from the bottom, we got, let me refresh to get, oh, yeah, here you go. Let's start again, guys. Sorry about that. That's it. Starting from the bottom, we got Mikhailo, 9. It's interesting because everybody managed to solve at least one question. So yeah, it's like, yeah, cool. Well done, Mikhailo. 13 points for him today. Top 8, 15, Robert. I think he played intermediate as well, right? Yeah, that's impressive. I love this kind of people, right? They join all the challenges. They finish like in 10 minutes, very yellows. Top 7, John. Oh, always happen. Yeah? 17 points for him. 1 question sorted. Top 6, Konstantin again. He played 2 challenges today. 33. 2 questions sorted for him out of 5, if I'm correct. You see the elegance, right? The main issue. Top 5, Jeroen. Jeroen, thank you. Jeroen, 42. 3 questions for him today. Really good, really strong. Top 4, Suhaib, 46. 3 questions. Look at the pentagraph. It's getting better, right? It's getting more, yeah. Top 3, Sergey, 47. Great. Again, player joining 2 challenges in 30 minutes. It's very, very impressive. Well done, guys. Top 2, who is left? Who's played the expert? Anyone here? 1? And? Oh, okay. So your name is? Dimitri. So will Dimitri be the king of the kings of JavaScript? We'll see. Top 2 goes to, Mo. This guy is joining from London. This is one of our classic players, right? You'll find him easily on the charts. Well done for him, especially considering he joined in the last 10 minutes. And that means that the king of the kings, the winner of the winner today is Mr. Dimitri, 59. That's fantastic. Very, very, very sexy, Dimitri. So, yeah, of course. Why not? How you found it?
It was fun. I mean, there were some issues I found in the tasks. Like, I guess the most, the moment when I got stressed when it told me that I had like more statements that the linter let me pass through. Yeah. So I had to split everything in 2 functions and that kind of stuff. But I mean, yeah, I just tried to solve it in a dumb way, a straightforward way, just to get in time. Cool. Perfect. It was good.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Well done. Right, so I think that was it, right? Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the experience. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Actually, this is public for you all. So that's a good question. That's a good point, actually. Because now, if you play a challenge, you can do something very sexy, I hope, which is you can, on top of reviewing the results and just comparing against your friend and see who performed better and worse, all these sorts of things, you can do a side-by-side code comparison, right? I find this particularly interesting because even if you know how to solve a question, right, I think it's a good, it's a good, it's frozen? No, maybe not. No, it's there, right? So it's a good way to learn different coding styles, right? To see different approaches towards solving the same problem. This is a good, when we talk with arrays, right? Some people using reduce right, map, filter, there are different techniques, right? So even if you know how to do something, we found particularly interesting to compare side by side and to discuss which solution is better and why. Anything else, guys? No? Cool, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the experience. I did enjoy, so looking forward to work again soon. Thank you, guys.
Okay, if I'm the last responsible person here, I want to thank you everyone for joining us and see you next time. I don't know when, really, maybe in 3 months, because in a month and a half we probably have React Amsterdam meetup, and then the conference in April, and maybe then in May close to the conference JS Nation, something like this. So see you next time. And yeah, thanks, bye.